So Oli, Yanni, we welcome you to WITS and thank you for honoring our invitation and kickstarting the 2022 seminar program. Over to you. Just a note that after Oli Yanni's presentation, my colleague Stefan Yale will be taking over to manage the Q&A. So keep your questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's really, really nice and good to be here, and both to be able to present, but also to know, to learn more about what you are doing here, and I'm looking forward to hear your comments and questions. And I hope I can hear that the sound is a little. If I stand a little longer further away, maybe it's get better. Okay, I suggested when Stephanie said, what do you want to say? Well, why should trade unions bother with skills? Because my background is from labor movement studies on the one hand, and studies of vocational education on the other hand. And why bother? And I start just to sum up very short, why bother? Of course, power resources is important for unions and workers, both for the labor market and in the work organization. We come back to that. But also knowledge and skills are fundamental for developing a decent work and sustainable economy. But for workers are not only labor, they are also producers. They should also be taken seriously, their capacity and the right to do decent work. And skills are foundation for autonomy at the workplace, and autonomy is important and fundamental for recognition and development of self-worth, and which is absolutely important if you want to develop a democratic participation in the society. And that's why also union comes into the question. High quality of skill development needs quality educational training. And a union should take an active role on that. Must not leave it to all others. And the last but not least, I'll come back to that in the end, learning happens in social and cultural environment. And social construction of communities of knowledge and skills, can offer important basis for social integration and socialization of collective identities. All these things are important. And I will talk a little about all of these different dimensions. First part, a little more exploring about the basic of my arguments, and also a little about why does it, I said, a problem for the unions, because that is my observation, that it is not all unions that really bother so much, or it comes into a secondary, or as a secondary theme for the unions in Norway, and I hear that also here. And one thing to have in mind always, I think, is that workers are not only labor. It's not only selling labor power, which of course, and that they do, and its salary and general labor conditions are important, but also this aspect of to be a producer, to have interest in the result, in the content, in the conditions of work, and also and that is very, very important. But this two-sided thing is also maybe one of the reasons for the background of the two-sided or the two different traditions in labor movement organization. Historically, there has been developed different kinds, but you can say at least two typical types of industrial or labor unions. There are those industrial labor unions organizing all workers at one place, depending on skills. Another based on the craft and skills. And the first then with a weight on salaries, and the other on the weight on producer interests. And these two sides, I think, you don't come away from this. Unions have to relate to both sides. So the historical conditions are deciding where, on what the labor unions will concentrate on. And historically, there had been a tension there, very strongly, between producerism and what you can call laborism. And we have the classical critique of many craft-based or trade-based unions that they're close to others. They are just labor aristocracy, and so that's a classical critique on that kind of union. But they also will mobilize their interest towards the aggressive employers as employees, as labor. But also a critique on the craft-based unions are that they defend old technology. They are not open for new things. That is a problem with that kind of unions. And that is still a critique on that dimension for the unions today. They cannot just defend the old technology. You have to be open for new things. I will come back to that. And I will argue that absolutely possible for the unions to be part of developing new type of skills, new type of trades, and developing trades also for the future technology. But historically, there has been this tendency, or there has been the strongest on the labor. The laborism has been the strongest tendency in the Western capitalism, at least. And that has to do with capitalism's development as such, or developing workers from manual workers to wage laborers. And that has to do with the whole historical development. I mean, the trade union started, as you know, very strongly with the artisans' defense on their interest as producers. And that they were very important in the first phase of the labor movements, in Europe and as in America. But the commodification of labor power, dequalification of labor, as you know from Braverman, or developing or reducing people to two legs tools, as was used in a book of Robert Castell, was developing. That is, and all from the analysis from Pilani of the development of the social problem and disbanding of people from the economy. And then the whole historical counter-development, or the counter-movement, was very much based on the social critique on that is embedding it. So the industrial trade unions got kind of a strongest position. The re-embedding through class compromises in the Western capitalism was very much on that basis. There was regulating of labor market, and welfare capitalism developed. So that decommodification of labor power through that dimension. So that is maybe the reason, for example, if you see ILO, Guy Standing, he wrote an article, a book work on after globalization. He had worked a lot in ILO and criticized very much ILO for exactly the problem of just reducing the workers to labor. And not having the eye on the workers also as producers, and then take care of the occupational identities and occupational interests. And if you look at the Nordic model, as it's called, the Scandinavian model of welfare capitalism, it's very typical also on that basis. But you see that in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, you have different kind of unions. In Sweden, it's very clearly industrial unions. In Norway, mostly industrial unions, but some craft unions. In Denmark, a mix. But in Germany, as you know, we can come back to, that has a very strong tradition of occupational education and trade-based work organization. They also have industrial unions. So they have strong tradition on the trade-based system, despite the fact that they have industrial unions. That opens for it is possible to combine their interests. And that is also bring me to the kind of some specification of the historical development. I mean, many trades and artisans, they just disappeared through industrialization. But a lot of these were also reconstructed to industrial skilled workers. As industrial skilled workers are different in different countries. I shall come to that shortly. And because it was already 100 years ago, a lot of people said, a lot of scholars said, well, now the trades and trade-based economy is not possible. Now, because now you have to change the skills all the time, and the apprenticeship system is out, and the trades are out of history. But in a lot of economies, they develop industrial trades. For example, in Germany and Switzerland and Norway and other places, and they have shown a capacity to adapt to new technologies and to adapt to technology change and to change their profile. Modern crafts like electricians and plumbers, for example, have the same capacities. Today, plumbers are much different than plumbers for 30, 40 years ago. They do highly advanced installations. Water, ventilation, bathrooms are important in the new green economy. And the same you can say about electricians and other type of more craft-like occupations. Not to speak about the workers in mechanic industries, manufacturing industries. But even the service industry, bank, business, retailers, they have been developed as based on a skill formation developed on a basis of dual system, as they call it, as a partially in the firm and partially in school through this trade-based system. So that is reminding that it is possible. It can be skills and skill formation can be connected to social categories developed through kind of similar, not the same, but similar as artisans' tradition. Because technology is important, but that is not, determining. It's social relations that is determining what kind of skill formation that develops. And the classical study that shows that is the comparison between Germany and Switzerland, in France in the 70s already, showing how the different, whoa, just a door for those who didn't see that. Workers in the industry in Germany has much more autonomy at the workplace than workers in France. And an indicator of that, for example, is the span of control, that a foreman or a supervisor, he can have many more workers in his group than in France. And that explanation is that German workers had broader and higher skills due to this dual system for skilled work training. And that culture of autonomy and producer pride and recognition at the shop floor is much stronger in this industry. So, and the general, I would say, just open this on my general argument is that these relations between education, work, labor process, and labor and employment relations, you have to see the interrelation between these dimensions. If you can understand the development of and the conditions for development of skills, the capacities of human beings at work. So that what kind of education you have is defining what kind of work you can develop, and also what kind of labor relations are in play. Of course, here also are other dimensions coming in. Gender divisions, that's a huge difference. Still in Northern Europe also, even in Norway, we have very relatively equal gender relations, but in the occupations, huge differences between the gender. But class divisions, power relations at work, but also racial divisions, of course, is in play here to define and to is a dimension that is influencing development of the skill formation. And these dimensions in play, but just to remind this shortly, is of course, also in work organization can be division of labor at work. Work can be a broad-based work. You need a lot of skills, or they can be narrow. The hierarchy can be very strict, or they can be given more autonomy. That is those dimensions in the work organization. You see what kind of possibilities is it for not only to having skills, but to use the skills. And how can you have skills if you're not able to use it? I mean, that's quite an obvious thing. But it also is a question of what kind of labor is it talked about? What kind of labor market is it? Is it how much informal, formal contracts are there? I know in South Africa the informal labor is huge. The use of contractors and all that is enormous, and that of course makes it very difficult to work and develop a good skill formation system. How much collective agreements, or is it individual agreements? Or is it full-time, part-time? All these are factors, aspects of the situation for the labor. And it's also the education and training system. Is it company-based? Is it just on the job training based? Or is it schools, more or less organized or steered and developed by not politicians, but by top down? Or is it a kind of corporate dual system, as in apprenticeship systems, or trade-based, a kind of school and internships come together? What kind of system? All these there are all kind of possibilities here. So my general argument, as I said, is that different education and different kind of skills open for different kind of work organization. But again, a different kind of work organization demands different kind of skills. Those things go so together. So if you should develop good training system, you also have to develop work and work relations and what is happening on the workplace. And I suppose you at this center, you know all about that, because the center is about that training and work, the education and work. But it's so important to have this in mind when you discuss politics and the possibilities of development of skills. So on this background, I will say a little then about some Norwegian skill formation to kind of illustrate some of the problems and say something about how is it, what is happening there, and what I see as good size and difficult size of that in the situation there. And just to remind, Norway is a very small country. We have a very good economy. It is a rich country, and it's and that makes also the expanding building industry possible. They are building, and the builders and constructors, and half of the constructing builder employees now are from Poland and Lithuania. So we have a lot of people coming there. And that also has actually a challenge or the pressure on the skill formation system in Norway. But and we have a general educational system, and we have an upper secondary education with the right for all. All have the right to have upper secondary education, and there's one system. There are some private schools, but not very many, and no fees. But the WET system, as a vocational education and training system, has still some of the old divisions between the sectors still, even though we have integrated since in 1904 and one system, there's still this division between different traditional sectors. And just see here what we have earlier days. We have one, 1 year course for handicraft housework for the housewives in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Right? They are now gone, but they are integrated in other kind of school-based education. But we have office and commerce, that was one special training. Health and social care was one special training. And craft and industry was one special training. And for the dual or the apprenticeship system, it was only then at that time craft and industry that used that. But in let's say the political tradition from, let's say, after the Second World War, 50s, 60s, 70s, was very school-oriented, very much all weight on general education. And apprenticeship was seen as an anachronism. It was outdated. It was old days. And it also represented a kind of domination, a system of domination on young workers. That was a kind of very strong ideology even in the labor movements. Liv Melde, as Stephanie knows, she can tell about that, how her companions, also not she, but also people in the 70s in the unions, saw it partially as that. I mean, and the same thing was actually in Germany. A strong tradition for apprenticeship was because it is an apprenticeship system open for domination. That's no question about it. So the question, that's why the union should bother. So that is my point. So that is why you must not leave the apprenticeship system, if you use that, to only the firms, the companies. But there was, as I also said earlier, that was very much social critique. It was strong, and but it was the salaries and industrial policy was the strong thing. The qualification, education was in second line, and there was some craft-based unions. There were the industrial-based industrial trade unions are the strongest. Craft-based unions were some, but they were often also criticized as they're thinking only of themselves. That kind of critique. But interesting enough, some of that, 2-3 of those craft-based unions, that is also part or members of the overall labor movement, have been one of some of the most radical unions, also in supporting others, also in supporting national solidarity, but also international solidarity. So this, it's not necessarily just thinking of themselves, even though those unions were, that was the plumbers, the electricians, the elevator installers, for example. The elevator installers are kind of very much strong for one of the strongest unions in Norway, and also the electricians. And electricians was one of those unions that also had a strike 15 years ago for securing further education in work, at work. And that is, that goes to showing the interest of that kind of they saw the necessity of dealing with their own interest, not only a salary, but also in further education. But in the 80s, actually, we got we call it a renaissance for the dual system, for the trade-based training and apprenticeship. Actually, against the dominating trend in other countries, like in England and other places. But that was actually promoted by industry, inspired by the German model. High-skilled workers needed transformation, for transformation towards some kind of, say, post-Fordism, if we can call it like that. Also towards more flexible organization in the industry, we need higher skilled workers. And I know one, and that is not then only for traditional metal workers and that kind of trades, platters and drillers and all that. But it's also in the, for example, in process industry, also the industry, chemical industry, wood processing, metal processing, also even food processing. They developed for the production workers there. It was developed skilled worker categories, and those categories developed quite substantially. Also earlier days, in the 50s, 60s, people working in those fertilizer plants, for example, I did a study on that very early in my career. They said, well, we were recruited from the street. We just come in and was trained on the job and got that. But then, if something happened, as in the production, they had to call on the supervisor or the engineer or anything like that. So they were just, not even, maybe not two legs tools, but they had a very narrow skill profile. And that's changed enormously over 20 years, from the 80s to 2000, towards highly skilled workers able to steer the production process in all stages. And the status changed. They're highly popular educational tracks now for young people, wanting to have, well, I don't think they're good paid, but also they are highly recognized, and they give basis for pride and self-confidence as workers. In that kind of industry, the collective identity of what to be a worker in these places have changed very, very much. So that is the positive aspect of that kind of training system in my view. So in 1994 in Norway, 1994, we had a huge educational reform, and from a very combined model, it was developed with much school. It was developed with based on trades and apprenticeship, and actually even also the state, supported that, gave support to companies or groups of companies. One thing that has developed, many companies are going together in kind of groups and organize their training together. And new trades are developed in all sectors, and more apprenticeships are coming, and more in the firms, training offices, consuls, a lot of activity around apprenticeships. So this institution has developed in a fairly stronger way than it was in the 70s, with leaders, instructors, and boards. And in apprenticeship system, councils and boards based on both representatives of the companies and trade unions are crucial. It's not a state-based system. It's a kind of cooperative system. So we have a lot of more, over 600% growth of apprentices, but this has been it's still a huge difference between the sectors. It is not easy to develop trade-based union, skill formation and training in retail, in service sector, at all. For example, in retail, most people are recruited not from the street, from the universities. So students and others are working there. And there are part-time work, and there's not so much full-time work in retail. And in the office work, there are also, it's a classical office work, more and more are recruited from university, and from bachelors and even masters. In our university, every person now hired as in administration, also all kind of administration, are comes from our master, have masters in sociology or administration or business schools or anything. So the basis for recruiting from below is then very difficult. So that is, shows how much the general education has changed. And in health and social care, it's also difficult, even though they have a more stronger tradition of training, also for what we call auxiliary nurses. Is that the concept you use here? Also help nurses. But they have managed to develop that kind of training in the apprenticeship system. But so the general problem, if you want, for this kind of modern dual system, is to keep up the sustainability for occupational principle. With that I mean that if you are hired in a company, you are hired on the basis of your occupational skills, and as occupational with a person with special occupation, you are expected to do special kind of work. So that is, you're not doing everything. You do that kind of work. And also, if you're hired as an auxiliary nurse, the hospitals expect you to know what to do. So that, but the character of these traits, if you develop new education or some traits within the skill formation system, we see that if it is just an educational category, just develop kind of curriculum from educational experts, state decide on educational policy, kind of general qualification control systems and for producing educational credentials and all that kind of system, then it's not sustainable. It doesn't work. It is just then another kind of general education. It must connect to categories of skilled workers. You have to connect the education and the training to what is going on at the workplace, and organized by councils and boards in the sectors that this training are related to. And so and also, last but not least, that the qualification and identities are carried out, so to speak, by social communities, that there are built up groups of workers that, well, we say we are platters, we are auxiliary workers, and as auxiliary workers, we are a proud group of workers that do things, and like the production workers in the chemical industry, the special category know what to do, and they are proud of what they are doing. So you have to have a group of workers that can represent these kind of skills. So you need some kind of work organization, labor process based on skilled workers. And you have to have a long-term rationality in the economy. You cannot just take whatever. You have to have, I would call it a moral obligation by the economic actors, that you have to take in apprentices and you have to give them training, and that is in a long-term perspective. I would say now in the last part, I will some more, let's say, pedagogical or trained or arguments for the trade-based skill formation. And also the importance of this community aspect of training and as basis for skill formation. And a community, then, I don't use that concept as a community living in a community, where you are as it often is, but the community at work as a collective group. But first then to the experience of what you get by the work-based training is you see how learners experience to cope, get recognizing of what their recognition of what they do, and get are becoming proud of what they're doing, and how that is motivating further education or further training, but also motivating of work and independent work. But also then the good thing with the trade-based skills are this collective belonging. You come into a group, you are recognized, and you experience solidarity also on the basis of being a worker, not only as labor, but also as producer, as worker, what you do. And this is also very important, of course, for the collective interest of power and security for the workers. But I also think that what this apprenticeship system actually promotes, as I have seen, is also by the firms in the companies. They promote, if they actually a long-term economy, they promote a moral obligation. It's very interesting to see when I go into do studies in Norway, see all kind of businesses. They say, oh, we have to earn money, that's for sure. But they take care of and they have responsibility for the apprentices, and they take in also people who maybe have some problems. There are in companies also people that can take responsibility for the training. So that aspect is, I think, is quite interesting to keep in mind. So, I often use this citation from the book of Pure Sable, The Second Industrial Wide. I think they summed up very much the strength of the craft workers and also craft workers is then also a trade-based industrial worker. They are bred, not born, and the formation of their identity as person is bound up with their admittance into a group of producers on the one hand, and the mastery of productive knowledge on the other. And I think that is a very critical question for the trade unions, because they have to take part in the answering. Okay, socialization to what kind of identity shall it be what happen in the training? If you have training and you are developing kind of groups of workers, what kind of identity, what kind of group shall be there? What kind of admittance into what kind of group? And what kind of productive knowledge should they master? What kind of skills? For me, it's obvious that the union should relate and engage in questions like that. And not because and not only then leave that to the educational system or to the job-based training, or just for that the company should take care of that. And identity, what is that? I mean, it's has both a normative dimension and a competence dimension. Developing collective identity, what must I do? What is the right thing to do here? And what must I know? What is important to know? How to learn that? And that you can learn what must I do, for example. What is the right kind of work in a workplace? And that is not necessarily defined or decided by the supervisor or the company. It can be decided by the group of workers themselves. Here we do that kind of work, that kind of quality. We don't do shit work here. We do good work here. So, and that could be should be the responsibility for the workers' communities themselves. And learning and socialization also includes not only kind of cognitive skills or technical skills or manual skills, intellectual skills. It includes also social, emotional skills. And it includes the whole person. I mean, that is very important to know. So, the co-workers and as the unions as co-workers organizations should be engaged in what kind of development of people is it going on at the workplace. To see in Norway, from some of my research shows then what the learners, 17, 18 years old, what they favor in school, practical learning, making real things, having time for at the workplace, do things, the importance of that, and they have the possibility to become apprentices, and as apprentice, they want to be responsible, to be taken seriously, and they have a social belonging. And of course, they earn money. That's also a good thing. So and then to grow in to become not only a skilled worker, but also a worker. As they are socialized into communities of workers, and that is open for that's what I mean for that the basis of collectivity at the work through the training. And and the companies in Norway, this is of course a lot of companies are interested in apprentices. That shows they are attractive on the labor market, but also they cultivate all learning cultures. If companies are interested in developing a culture of learning and competence and independent, autonomous workers that know what to do, well, then they should open for that. Then there should be possibility to develop that kind of culture. Doesn't come from the heaven. So if they want good workers that can work on their own basis, do independent work, then they should take care of a good training system also. So for the advantages for the society, it's done in general with a good apprenticeship system. It's relevant, so you get professional competences, but you also have for the learners conditions for recognition and developing of pride, and you have for the unions power base and securing aspects of the moral economy in general. The problem with this, the challenges, to end with some challenges, and it's many of them. Two I will mention here, two types. One type is a challenge in educational system, in modern education, all kind of modern education, but much more in general education than in occupational education, and not to speak of apprenticeship systems. It's an individualizing culture. The general education is a favor individualism. That is a problem, and because now more and more young people, they go into general education, and then, and they don't go into the apprenticeships, and they don't go into vocational education, and they just want to get higher up. They want all the time to get higher up for some reason. That if you ask them if they want, well, we want more education, I want higher up. As if everybody can come higher up. And I always ask them, what do you mean higher up? So it's not logical. I mean, obviously that's a really problem as I see it in the society today. But a bigger problem for the training system is neoliberal economy, marketization, subcontracting, temporary jobs, temporary work agencies that has no obligations for training. That is maybe the biggest problem. And for the labor movement, I think they should have a skill formation interest on the higher up on the agenda, and they struggle with that in Norway, and I also, and it would be interesting to hear what is the situation here, more about that. And the interesting thing is also, just to end with that, is that when things here in Norway are saying, well, we must do more for vocational education, it's very often they think of for the weak learners, those who don't go to university. And I think that is a wrong attitude. You should do more for the occupational training and for training of workers as for everybody, also for the so-called strong learners. And that shows that the possibilities are in vocational education, and both for getting personal development but also for the society in general. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
That was really, really interesting. I learned a lot. It gave me a lot to think about, and I have an enormous number of questions. I'm sure other people in the room also have questions, but I'm going to abuse my role as chair and dive in. Just to start the debate. And I'm going to start by being very provocative, because I agree with most of what you said, and I think that it's hard to disagree with in the Norwegian context. So that's why I want to come in and sort of play devil's advocate to your argument by making two kind of engagements from the South African point of view. So the first is this. Do you think that your argument is a rich country argument? Could it apply in a poor country context of high unemployment? And the reason I'm asking that relates to my second question, which is, in our skill system, which is very complex, we have a very complex set of institutions and bodies that are supposed to enable collective governance with tripartite governance from unions, business and the state, and so on. That skill system that we have in all its complexity and to a large extent dysfunctionality was set up, instigated by our labor movement. And one union in particular, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, one of our more radical unions, industrial union that was very concerned with skills, was concerned with industrial development in their sector. It is true, and this maybe is part of the problem, that to the extent that they engaged with skills, they didn't table it as a bread and butter collective bargaining issue, but as a policy issue which they then got involved in separately. And within a few years of the systems being set up, they were unionists were saying, we can't attend all these meetings. How are we supposed to, as unions, we've got crises in the workplace, workers are losing their jobs, and I've got to go and sit in some meeting talking about qualifications and competencies and training. They didn't have the capacity, they were outmaneuvered, they couldn't really engage. So on that level, is it not a luxury item? Or is it something that workers can and should, in a poor country context, really be engaging with? And the second reason for my question is, you know, just given the kind of the brutality of workplaces in South Africa and the challenges, or would you say, despite all of those challenges, this could still be a way of building unions, building the power of the labour movement and the working class? So that's my provocative question to you, Prof. Olsen.
Very, very relevant, and absolutely questions that I understand. And of course, I mean, even the discussions of what is possible to change in Norway or in Sweden and all that, to change these systems are difficult. And of course, I have learned a little about the South African development, and I hear that one thing that it was done was to develop these kind of course systems, and you can get all kind of training. But as I understand it, they are not regulated towards kind of occupations and stable groups of workers, of trades. And I think that is a problem. But I mean, it's and also you say that the unions were coming in and they wanted to work with the skills, and they took part in the councils and boards and all that. But again, if it's only political discussions on a general level, then it's most general. You have to build it from bottom up, and that's why I think I don't think it's possible to introduce full-scale apprenticeship system in South Africa, and that's not that possible at all when half of the population is unemployed, and because it doesn't work. So, but I think that what it can do is to go into at least some of the group of workers, some of the trades, some of the places where there are stable work. For example, in the traditional artisans fields, but also in the metal industry, for example, where there are stable work, and they are more or less also permanent hires also. There you can do it, and you can go in and you can, you know, construct the training around more social characters of workers. What is it to be a skilled worker, as a platter, as a welder, or whatever? And to discuss that on the local level. And that is not a top union guy's job. That is, he has no ideas. And these top union guys, they don't know anything about that. And because that is my experience also. Every time that the top union guys come into the question, that is not very fruitful. So it must be the local people. But I mean that when I say think of unions, it's not only the top union, it's the local shop stewards, so the workers' representatives at the workplace. That is also for me the unions. So and you should and they can also come into occupational boards and engage in practical, not in doing the practical training, but also to overlook, to see that the training is relevant, to discuss the development of the skills in, for example, for platters and welders or plumbers or electricians, and I would have started there, but I see that, for example, in retail and all that, it must be much more difficult, absolutely, because as where to start. So that's a totally different story, but also there you can have in mind, well, if you get some kind of training, what shall it give you as a group, as a member of a group, as you have a kind of, okay, I've done training, and for that kind of position, and you represent that, and you, I mean, it's so that you can develop some kind of reference that if you have done something, it means something to others also, so that it is relevant for not the career, but for the position at the workplace, as for, and also later on for bargaining and salaries. But I mean, it's but for the general economy, of course, it's so enormous complex. I understand that. I read an article of one of the former, he was in the group of the metal workers, NUMSA. Carl Klute wrote in an article in the Maverick, Daily Maverick, criticizing the system today, say that it doesn't work. It obviously does not work because it just gives courses and it opens for a general that course delivers people, come or consultants earn a lot of money offering courses that what does it lead to? Leads to maybe nothing, he says. And he says that we need a totally different system. And he suggests that in the end of the article. So, but if that is possible, I don't know. But I mean, it's obviously, I hear what I have as the few people I'm talking to, is that obviously it's things that have to be changed.
Just give us a sense of your Australian Francine.
I have a question. I have a kind of theoretical question and an empirical question about what you presented. But your last comment, just to say that there is this weird. You're trying to say that unions and workers need to take this seriously. There's this strange obsession with qualifications and courses. So I work on the Global Labor University. We take honors and masters for trade unionists. And when you get an application from students, it will be like, this thick with certificates from this and that course and this and that training that are exactly these kind of things that I think Carl Klute is describing. Anyway, so there is it is taken seriously in a strange way, but in a way that doesn't lead to the positive outcomes you described. But that's not the question I wanted to ask. I wanted to say, there's a kind of chicken and egg problem that you describe the benefits of a strong system, apprenticeship system, and you say it will give workers autonomy and strengthen unions, etc. But it seems that in order for it to be in place, you have to have strong workers who can demand their autonomy. So you have, employers obviously have in most industries have an interest in not recognizing the skills and autonomy of the workers and in keeping them at a low level. I mean, there's a question of why in certain industries and certain economies at certain times there's a shift in the interests of employers. So you said, if employers want skilled workers and they want to develop them, they have to do this. So there are obviously some industries, some places where that's the case, but most times throughout most of the world and throughout most of the history of capitalism, employers don't want to recognize that. So it's like this. I guess what the theoretical question is like, do you see these things as linked? It's like, do you think that you have to have strong organization and strong workers who make sort of demanding autonomy a priority in order to realize the system, and then it leads to some positive feedback? Or, yeah, I guess that's the question. And then just the empirical question is, in your overview of the Norwegian system, you kind of had this moment, you said, I think in the 1980s or 90s, when you had a revitalization of the apprentice system. And you described this kind of shift that employers suddenly took it seriously. And so I just wonder what happened. Did unions organize to demand that, or did that come from the top down, from employers suddenly wanting different type of workers? Because that would give a clue into this theoretical question.
No, I mean, that is issue.
No.
That is exactly one of the huge, absolutely, what I also was commenting on in this, the relation between the different dimensions, between educations, qualifications, and work, what is happening in work, in the technology, in the workplace, and also in the when it comes to employment relations and so on. And that is, it's historically, as I experienced it in Europe, Northern Europe especially, from Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and so on, especially the German case is interesting. There was enormous optimism in the 80s, very paradoxically, because in a way, you would think that that was liberalism, but it was, in Germany it was not liberalism like in US, the Reagan, and in England with the Thatcher. It was the interest in the industry of getting high-skilled workers. We need to organize the industry differently. We need high-skilled workers to become flexible. And that was an answer to our old kind of demand from the unions. The unions, after getting security in the 60s, the next step was how shall we have democracy at the workplace, and then how to develop autonomy. And that was going on, well, we can have really possibilities here now. And it was an optimism, and the same in Norway. That was the same, the renaissance of apprenticeship, the same positive attitude towards work development or organizational work development happened in Norway in the 80s, early 90s. But then the 90s came, and the more short-term capitalism was stronger and stronger, and let's say they want the companies then wanted both high-skilled workers and people who did exactly what they should do all the time. So they wanted both, and that was a big blow for that development. Absolutely, and you see it also in Germany, this tension, and that's what I mean also, that you cannot. This is the developing of high-skilled workers. It does not automatically give autonomy at workplace. You have to have strong unions as unions also, or a work organization that can defend the rights of that, and against short-term capitalism, short-term organization, and all kind of models for organization development that came in the 90s. All kind of all that rubbish that came that undermined that. So it's. And that is also this, and here of course much stronger, also with the racial divisions, of course, it must be very, very difficult to handle.
Tulika.
Thanks, Prof. Which of the three different types of training you mentioned, company-based, dual apprenticeships, and school-based training, would you say it's a quality training which trade union must encourage its members to focus on? That's the first question. And the second question, you mentioned quite a number of things why bother? Why unions must bother on the skills question. I'm thinking in my head that, probably Victor may disagree with me, that quite a number of members in unions are at a lower level in the workplace. They're in the production very low, and they earn very low. And what you call as tendency of unions, labor, working conditions, it seems to be very important for workers and salaries. Now I'm thinking here, seated here, that you have a union in Volkswagen as an automotive company, and the union has 80,000 members. Of the 80,000, 65 are in the production line, very low paid, yet you want them to concern about skills, yet the car that they produce, they can't even buy. Why would they bother about skills, which plays a role for companies, but they don't help them to buy the cars they produce? The second question, the last one.
That's the third one.
Okay, the last one. Very interesting. You made a point that technology is important, but not a determining factor. I was not sure determining factor on what, because in the study that I'm doing, the technology is not only important, but also determined growth and transformation in the workplace. So I wanted to understand if technology, from your experience, is important but not determining. In what sense?
I think I should start with the second, so that is clear. And it's a very good example. Why bother for the training if we don't get anything back? Of course, and that is a very crucial thing. You do more and more work, better and better work, and if you don't get anything back, neither recognition or autonomy or money, then I wouldn't bother. And that is, of course, that is coming to then it's a question of strength and to demand getting back for it, something back for it. And that you have, for example, the higher salaries, and that you can actually be able to buy the car you produce, and that's obvious. And that is actually so that shows also that it's not only a question of relation between education and work, labor process, but it's also is the relation to the labor and the contracts that have to came into the bargaining system. That if you develop higher skills, if you can do better work, you shall also have something for it. That's a classical union demand, and that is how also the historical compromise was. Productive, higher productivity. Well, we shall get something for it. So that is quite clear. And then the last one with the technology is that I mean it's obviously important. It's obvious, but for example, when the computer-based technology came into the machinery production, producing cars, for example, then many said, well, now it's all run out with the skilled workers. Now it's just engineers on one side and two legs tools on the other side. As it's simple work. But it didn't happen many places. Actually, for example, in the German industry, it didn't happen. They reinvented themselves as skilled workers, and that didn't come from so they took care of their own professional skills. Say that, well, we want to handle these computers. We want skills that we can handle these computers. So I mean, that is what I mean, that it's not as a technology is of course very important and determining but it's not absolute. It's the social situation or the social relations and the power situation that can also decide how technology is adapted and used. So, and the first question was this: what system would be, if I understood, would be the best? I must admit, I think it is potential in the last one, also in this kind of some kind of apprenticeship system or some kind of trade-based system, because that opens with the open